What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Not Again with me, Dany Acosta. And today we have the man, the legend, the person that's been very much on the spotlight recently with a new Apple TV show. We have Mr. Jeff Crosby. Jeff, how are you today?
I'm fine, Danny. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So today, guys, we're going to be talking about a little bit about the Apple TV show, and we're also going to be talking about a lot of your involvement in the community in Lynn with social justice, a lot of different things that you've been involved in, and maybe some of the things that you're involved in now. So we'll be right back with Mr. Jeff Crosby. Awesome. Well, welcome back, guys. So today we have Mr. Jeff Crosby. Jeff, how you been recently?
I've been good, man. I've been good. So yeah, I'm 73 years old, trying to figure out what I'm doing in this part of my life, and I'm enjoying it. So.
Still very young.
Yeah, not so young.
Got to work on the six-pack this year.
Yeah, right. Next year. Maybe next year.
Maybe next year. Okay, yeah. Hey, you know what? It's always a good fresh start. Well, tell us a little bit about when did you start getting into like social justice movements and things like that?
For me, it started really young. I was involved in high school. This was the 60s, and I grew up having to think about civil rights. I went to some civil rights schools when I was a kid. I remember I was very religious when I was younger, and I remember seeing black people get blasted off the steps of white churches with fire hoses and thinking like, something's wrong here, And then you had to think about the war in Vietnam, because initially the draft was pretty universal. Yeah. So you had to think, am I going to get a 1A? Am I going to go? What am I going to do? What's going on with this war? So I had to think about that a lot as a kid. And I turned 18 in 1968 when there was all kinds of things going on in the world. Yeah. And I worked in a factory, a place called Lloyd A. Fry's Roofing Factory in Watertown. And I used to ride my bike there, and I could... it was the bottom end of the workforce. You got paid by cash every day, So I would go in there and I'd work, and I came back the next summer because I was working there in the summers, and one guy had killed himself in the plant. Another guy was injured and was out of work for good, permanently injured. Another guy had disappeared with an injury. So those kind of experiences made me think about labor, made me think about civil rights. I lived in Pakistan for a couple of years as a kid. So I was exposed from 1960 to 62. I was just 9, 10, 11 years old. And there were some experiences I had there that made me see parts of the world that you maybe not noticed growing up here in the United States if I hadn't had that opportunity to travel. My dad was working at the Pakistani Air Force Academy. So I was living on a Pakistani Air Force base. Yeah. So all those things, I think, got me going. And by the time I was in high school, I was working with SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, just doing simple stuff, nothing heroic, just stuffing envelopes, whatever the college kids told me to do. Yeah. So I got involved, very early, and it's been central to my life really since that time. So.
And when looking back, can you remember your first successful, let's say like a movement that you were so heavily involved in that when you did see it succeed, it really transformed your life? What would that be?
I'd say during that period there were a number of things. It was what sometimes people call the second Reconstruction, so that period of U.S. history. So we got Voting Rights Act passed, we got affordable housing built in the town that I lived in. We got the war in Vietnam finally ended, not in a positive way, but it did end. So I think there were a lot of things in that period that made me feel like this is worthwhile. Yeah. And I always had confidence in people. I always liked talking to people, whether they agreed with me or not. I liked knocking on doors and hearing what they had to say. So it's a matter of, are you winning things to feel that it's worth your time? And part of it is, do you like what you're doing every day? Do you find this kind of work, organizing social justice work, is it sustainable? And I think to do that, you have to like it every day. You're not only living for the promised land. You're only, trying to get to nirvana. You have to like what you're doing every day and find a way to contribute that's fulfilling and sustainable. And for me, it was fun,
What about in movements that you were heavily involved in, but they didn't probably reap the result that would have been hoped for? What was that experience like, and what movement was that?
Well, first of all, there's a whole period of retreat after the period that I just spoke about. Yeah. So now we're in a period where, voting rights are tending to be restricted again. affirmative action is under attack. The workers' rights have been cut way back, although there's now a resurgence of union organizing. So all of those things were turned backwards in a lot of ways. You know, in a way, what we need now is a third reconstruction to try to rebuild that again. So I would say there's two things. One is, what do you learn? You know, I always think of Joe Mazzulla, the coach of the Celtics. He's always saying, okay, if we lose a game, that's a chance to learn something. So part of it is constant summation. What do we learn? Some things you can't control. And the other part of it, I think, is just what I referred to earlier. If you like what you're doing every day, then everything doesn't hinge on winning or losing. You know, I've supported people in elections who lost. You know, the first time I worked with Pete Capano, you know, he lost when he ran for ward councilor. So you learn, you know, and then he came back a second time and came back a third time, and finally he won.
Yeah.
So you keep moving, but some things are out of your control. So you want to go to bed at night thinking, I did what I could. You know, I didn't save the world, but I did what I could, and I impacted what I could impact. And you feel good about that, win, lose, or draw. You know.
Yeah, no, I completely respect and honor a lot of the work that you've done. I don't know very much, but the little bit that I've heard here and there and everywhere from different people, because a lot of folks know you, as you know, and even my fiance, right? She's told me a lot of great things about you, a lot of amazing things that you have been involved in, and I admire a lot of your effort and a lot of perseverance that you've had, but also your wife. Your wife seems to walk along your side in a lot of these endeavors that you get involved in. So, how did you meet your wife? And tell us a little bit about that.
My wife's an extraordinary person. You know, I think she's contributes more and works harder.
Makes the best butternut squash.
You know, yeah, right. She makes good butternut squash.
Yes.
You know? And I just talked to her on the phone just now and said, I got a couple more people that need that chicken soup. You know, my wife is Jewish, and they call that Jewish penicillin. You know, it's
there
like
you go.
Chicken soup to help people who have been. And she's just extraordinary. I met her when I was 12 years old. We went to the same school in 7th grade, and the elementary school that she was from was mostly Jewish. There was one Christian kid in her 6th grade, and I was just the next one over. This was in Newton Corner, and my elementary school, 6th grade at the time, was how they did it, was all Christian with just one Jewish kid. So that's how segregated it was, and then we met in 7th grade. And I always thought she was cute, you know, and we became friends over the years and all the way through high school and off and on, you know, but we were always pretty close. We went to the same school, went to University of Wisconsin. I dropped out, but she stayed in. And, you know, and once we got back together, it was like we'd known each other with 7th grade. So it was not going to be a casual thing. It was, you know, we knew each other really well. We've been really good friends. And, you know, it's sustained us for 50 years of marriage, you know, just by nothing heroic, again, just respect. I think respect for each other and for her work and, you know, her values. And we share that. So it's been, you know, everything else. Sometimes we say, you know what, don't sweat the small stuff, and it's all small stuff, you know, just keep your eye on the prize, keep focused. But I have a world of respect for my wife, and she's a respected person in this community,
Absolutely,
as she should be, you know, she's special.
How does it feel when you have a partner in your life that one, shares the same values, but also fights for the same goal that you're fighting for, as, you know, talking about like social justice and civil rights, being part of that together, where, you know, rather than you being out there and maybe she's back at home and maybe not interested, maybe there's some people that go through that, but talking from a perspective of somebody that does have a partner that is involved along your side, what is that like for you?
So Dany, you talk like someone who's maybe getting married and thinking about this stuff, you know?
I'm seeking advice, yes, indirectly.
Yeah, for us it was always partners. I mean, there are people who talk about, I got supported by the little woman at home who kept the home front, and, you know, though obviously there's gender differences. You know, she cooks, I eat. You know, I do other stuff around the house, but I don't cook.
I kill the bugs. She cooks eggs.
I do a lot of stuff, but I do dishes and stuff. But so, but for me, it was always a partner, and that made a big difference. And it is a sacrifice. We have 2 kids that we raised, and there's only so many hours in the day. And sometimes Margie will say to me, oh, now you're going to do this? Or what are you not going to do? Or did you figure out how to have more than 24 hours in a day? And I go, yeah, okay, yeah, we should think that over. Maybe I'm overdoing it here. So, but I've always appreciated her. Anytime I ever go somewhere to speak, I always ask her to look at it and, you know, I always value her opinion on everything. And we don't always agree on everything, but our basic values and our desire to kind of compromise and work together so that that we can sustain each other's work. And she's on all kinds of boards around here. She tutors, she does all kinds of stuff, and she's
Wow.
a respected person. So for me, it's been a great partnership, and that's how I would want it to be. And she can be very critical. She'll say, no, this is not right what you're doing. This isn't right what you're saying. It's not right what you're writing. You're missing people. You're getting too highfalutin. You got to get down on the ground and listen more. And I really, that's been helpful all my life, and I pay a lot of respect to what she says and always seek her advice.
Yeah, no, that's really honorable. I think it's really important that more men are willing, right, and open to listening to their partners. I feel like there's so many women out there that have so much strong values and so much wisdom that they can share in their relationships. And often I see a lot of men that turn the year and say, oh, but I'm the head of the household kind of thing. And then we lose out on that wisdom. We lose out on those values. And it's like, dude, if you only work together. And one of the things that I also think about is like, let's say there's like two kind of meetings going on. You could be at one, she could be at one, and you guys are kind of splitting each other, but going in to the forefront in two different battles at the same time, but because you guys share the same values. So I think in a way you're able to really diversify how much involvement you guys have. So what brought you guys, what brought you guys over to Massachusetts?
Well, I should say if you marry someone like Margie, you don't really have a choice. You are going to listen. You are going to listen.
Yeah, okay.
So that was part of the deal from day one. So we both grew up here. Like I said, Newton Corner, and that's where we met in 7th grade. Went to Bigelow Junior High School, and then we both she first, and then I went later. Went out to Wisconsin. So we continued to see each other there. And then we moved back eventually. After I dropped out, we lived in Milwaukee for a while and moved back here. Our families were both still here. And my mom, unfortunately, passed away while we were still living away, and that was really unfortunate. We were able to see her, but not very much. And fortunately, by the time Margie's mom passed away, we were living back here and we were able to be around. So those were important for us to be near family. And also at a certain point, I'd been running around organized, unemployed, and at a certain point you got to get a job, if you want to settle down. So I was really glad to be able to get a job at GE and make a living and settle down. And after a few years of living in Boston, I just didn't want to drive up here anymore. So we had to. Sorry.
It's okay. Yeah, because I think it's important, right? When your family is going through some pressure and some of the things that happen, I mean, these are unexpected and unplanned, right? But when you're able to unite as a family and hold hand in hand and say, hey, we're both going through right now, but I'm going to stick by your side, you stick by my side, and we're going to grieve this together, that loss. And of course, being able to work in places like GE, being able to be out there in Boston and influencing so many corners of Massachusetts, I think it's really powerful that and it sounds a lot to me from what I've heard in the community, whether it's at different nonprofit meetings or coalition meetings. You guys are very respected, but also very needed. And that's been true, and it sounds like it's been true for many, many years.
One thing you try to do is not be so needed, So try to, I always felt like the essence of leadership is replacing yourself. And and that's always the challenge. You put your heart into something and, you want to stay with it. But it's also always a question of who's coming up and who's taking your place. And it might be someone that looks different than you. This town is changing, for example. So we try to keep that and not be as needed, and especially at this age, turn into a more advisory, supporting role. There's other folks that are going to be out on Front Street, and that's the way it should be, I think, at this point, for the most part.
Well, leaders do make leaders, right? As a person that is involved in a church, when I do youth ministry, I tell my guys, my goal is that you guys become better leaders than me. I'm going to equip you with everything I have. I'm going to teach you. I'm going to walk with you. But then you guys got to go. And then I got to go to the next place and build up leaders, and the next place and build up leaders, and so forth. And I think when it comes to a lot of these social justice movements, building up leaders is key because, as you said, right, if I'm needed and I'm the only guy on call that they have, I'm never going to sleep.
Yeah.
I got to build up leaders so that I can have some rest. And what better than to diversify our leadership out there and being able to reach out more communities so we can have more support, as we've been learning, right? There's power in people. There's power in numbers. And we're seeing that more and more every day. And so fast forwarding to today, what are some of the things that you've seen in Lynn that have really, let's say, impacted you recently?
Well, I would say for everybody, the biggest issue is housing and development. I'm fortunate. I bought a house when they were cheap, 15, 20 years ago in Lynn. But now for people, even with a GE income, it's pretty hard to buy a house, and rent is out of control, and it's everywhere. Lynn used to be the place where you could, find a cheap place to live in metropolitan Boston, and now that's not even true. So the question is, what kind of development are we going to have? It's not easy you have to bring in investment. It's all private capital. They're not coming here for charitable organizations, charitable reasons. So you have to draw an investment in a way that actually builds affordable housing and keeps rent down for everybody. So otherwise, people have been driven out. I know people have moved to North Billerica, people have moved to Haverhill, people moved to New Hampshire, people moved to Fitchburg, and they can't live here anymore. And so that's probably the biggest challenge I think facing the city. And fortunately, I bought a home back when you could still do that, and now it's just impossible. So that's a big deal. Schools are, I think we've got good teachers, but and hardworking teachers. We have a union that cares. But the challenges in the schools are huge. There are too many kids in the classes. Understandably, sometimes people look for alternatives, and so we've done some great things. We helped the union and the administration developed a family liaison position, a family outreach position, which is great. And usually there's Spanish-speaking people who can talk with Spanish-speaking parents. So that kind of thing, help people access the system, has been important. So there's been a lot of improvements. But it's tough.
Well, talking about youth, it's simmered down. Thankfully, I'm so grateful that it has. But it's still a thing that we're seeing left and right. Recently we went through I want to say almost a tidal wave of consistent and frequent shootings among youth. Youth were dying left and right in Lynn. What is your standpoint on that? What do you think Lynn should be doing? I mean, we hear unarmed response teams. We hear about funding police more for more training. There's so many things that we're hearing left and right. But what are your thoughts on this topic?
Well, first of all, I'm no expert on this. There's people out there, youth workers, maybe yourself with your church work, who know a lot more about this than I do. So I don't really pretend to have any big answers. I do think that people say young people today, they don't do this, they won't do that. That's not my experience. I was in a restaurant this morning, and the server came over to me and said, for breakfast, and said, are you a professor? You're always with young people, and because I have breakfast, it's like a breakfast meeting before, so that's how I get the chance to talk to somebody. And a lot of them are younger people. Everybody's younger to me now, but even to the server, the woman who was serving us. And so, young people will step up. They always have. The older generations always think the next generation is not up to snuff. So I'm not so worried about that. I do think an unarmed crisis response team is important, and we're working on something still. There was a long effort to do that, and very challenging. The question is who's going to control it, who's going to do it, and the Lynn Racial Justice Coalition, to their credit, did a lot of research. They looked at places in Albuquerque and all over the country, developed some models, and I think we've been able to carve out at least an experimental role with that. So, but it's a real challenge. Obviously, it has something to do with kids having opportunities and feeling like they have a chance. And if you feel kind of hopeless, or you don't have support in your family, or you're living on your own, I would think it's tougher. But, we're all human beings, and so I'm, confident that young kids today aren't going to be any different, or probably no worse and no better than previous generations. So we just have to find the support. Obviously, you need police. I had somebody walked into my house the other day because the front door was left open, and I heard Margie yelling, Jeff, there's someone in the house. There's a man in the house. Come down. And I was like, what? So I grabbed something, went running downstairs, and it was a guy who was he was non-threatening but non-verbal. He was mentally disabled, and he had just seen an open door and walked in while his brother was doing something else. So situation like that, I felt like that's an example. Once I realized he was just sitting there quietly, I didn't want to put my hands on him and try to get him out of my house, and then want to start a violent thing. So I had to call the police. I didn't know who else to call, but I made a point of saying, he's not threatening, and the cop who came was fine. By the time the cop got there, his brother had found him. But that's an example where, you don't need an armed person to come where something
Right.
could happen and flare up. So I think there's a lot of things where you can have unarmed professional mental health trained people to deal with issues, which actually should take some load off of the police, and they got other things to do. So
Yeah.
I think we're still working on that, still fighting on it. But I understand that people care about public safety, and people want someone to call if there's they need help from an officer. So obviously there's a role for that, and so
Yeah.
we just keep working on it. And look, all over the country, people are trying different things and creative things. Some are working, some are not. Some district attorneys have been elected who are decriminalizing certain types of things that don't really do anybody any harm. Then sometimes there's a swing back from that because people are concerned about crime.
Well, I heard about
overall crime is down.
I heard about Oregon, right? They had decriminalized drugs, and now they're recriminalizing
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yeah, and some of that is real. I don't know why they did that. I don't know the data either way in Oregon. But overall, most violent crime is down in most cities and nationally. It's down from the pandemic, and when after a while it went up because of all the stress and loneliness and all the isolation and poverty that happened with that. But overall, violent crime is down in almost every category. But a lot of it's used politically to terrify people.
Right.
Like, look, one undocumented person killed somebody. So like the fact is, immigrants, including undocumented immigrants, commit less crimes than people who grew up here in our culture. So stuff like that is hard to break through because you have like the sort of super right-wing people trying to terrify people about how horrible everything is. People get scared, and then they'll do things that are maybe wrong and in policy don't work. But so you got to try to break through that and look at the facts, but also understand people are scared. There are shootings. These are real. This is not, something people are imagining. So you kind of.
I was actually having a conversation with a gentleman yesterday who's part of a union, and I was telling him, like, what are your thoughts about people when they're far left or far right? And he's like, look, anytime you find a person that's far either which way, the further they are in their direction, the less willing they are to listen in the other.
Yeah.
And sometimes that breaks my heart. Like, I don't subscribe or label myself as like, oh, I'm, left or right. I try to stand in the middle as much as I can within the realms of what is the healthiest approach that I can take as an individual.
Yeah.
And I think part of it is that I am an immigrant. I'm not able to vote. But I think it also gives me space to be able to say, like, okay, there are some things I agree with on this side. There are some things I agree with on that side. But then there's those things where we become so, I want to say, for lack of better wording, so deaf to the other side that I think we're missing some of the points.
Yeah.
I saw a post by Elon Musk where he said, several dead, one immigrant was given a free air flight to California, and it went on and on and on, right? But then I hear about people that come here, right? Like, as an immigrant myself, a lot of us are actually creating jobs. And why aren't those things being highlighted?
Well,
right?
especially, remember, they used to say the immigrants are taking our jobs, right? Now, who our is, that's a question, first of all. But now, nobody can find anybody for any job. So we obviously need more people, so
Right.
they stopped saying that. So now it's crime. Now these are people, they're really murderers and rapists. And a lot of that is just racist stuff, and a lot of it is meant politically to kind of terrify people and get acceptance. If people operate out of fear, that won't be good. I mean, personally, I'm an unapologetically leftist, but that doesn't make me not want to listen to people. I have neighbors who are very conservative, very scared. They're voted for Trump or whatever. They're my neighbors. I have family like that, So, you have to be able to talk to people regardless of where they come from, and not because you find when you dig down, you usually find the things they're concerned about are things that you are also concerned about. But you also have to take a stand. If Elon Musk is a racist, you got to say Elon Musk is a racist. So I mean, you got to, call it out for what it is at the same time. So.
In my training as a social worker, one of the things that I was actually expressing in class was there comes a point where you have to put your identity and your kind of, not your values, but your identity, whether it's like myself, right, where I'm a Christian and this and that, I got to put that to the side. Because if I'm talking to somebody that's either far left or far right, they practice a different form of faith, they are in the LGBTQ community and on and on and on, I'm not going to serve them with less quality or less value because they don't align, let's say, for lack of better wording, with my faith, right? Now, I explain it this way to people. It's like an onion. All of the layers are, the sexual orientation, the gender identity, the this, the that, and the other. And all of these things are very important because it's giving me context on how I can best serve my client, on how we can best serve the community. But it doesn't mean that because of all of those layers, I'm going to serve my client otherwise. My approach to people, whether it's at a micro level when I'm working with one-on-one, or maybe one-on-two, one-on-three, like a family kind of therapy, or at a macro level, right, when we're doing like protesting, when we're doing this and that, shouldn't change based off of, oh, you know what, you don't line up with my values, I'm closing everything, right? And I think like one of the things that I've learned about all of this is there's people on the other side that I want to help. There's people on the other side that deserve an opportunity. Mm-hmm. I give the typical example, right, of like when I was dying in the hospital and I needed a blood transfusion, I didn't ask like, wait, before you do anything, what political party are they in? Like, you don't ask those things. That it doesn't matter.
Well, here's an example, I think, to your point. Like I said, I have some neighbors who are very conservative. They're Trump supporters and, all that. We don't agree on much of anything in some ways. But we had a benefit at my house that the Labor Council Women's Committee organized for Afghan refugees. Wow. So these are people who had survived, women, and it was a shower to help them have stuff to take care of their children with. And what we found was that these same neighbors, a lot of them, would go into the basement and they'd find that stroller that's perfectly good. You use them for 6 months, but they're built to last for eternity. Mm-hmm. They bought new stuff. So it was just an outpouring. I mean, people like you would expect Donna Coppola, for someone, example, who was just constantly giving to the community, but also very conservative neighbors. I would call them conservative and not on the same political end of the spectrum that I am. But they all turned out, they cared. They thought it was really nice. There was something in their hearts that said, these folks need some help. And these were immigrants, these were Muslims, they were people who were not in the mainstream in my neighborhood particularly, but they responded. So I think you have to have patience and you have to reach for what's good in people. At the same time, if people say racist stuff or people, support politically basically fascism or undermining and overthrowing elections and don't believe, you have to call that out. Sometimes you have to fight, even if you're in a minority. But you try to always treat people respectfully and try to find, where you can agree. Because this is the world we live in, We live in this world, not the next one. So we got to do what we can based on reality. So.
Well, since we are talking about Lynn, I'm going to close this segment with just asking you, what is your favorite restaurant in Lynn?
You know what? I have two. April's, I mentioned I was at a restaurant this morning. That's April's.
Nice.
I love that place. They have... what's it, mofongo, I think it is, especially.
Okay.
I can't eat that for breakfast. It's too filling, but it's great for lunch. And they have great omelets for breakfast, so I love that place. The other thing, I guess, is the Brickyard. It's sometimes Ward 6, sometimes I go down there. And after events, because that's open in the evenings all the time, and sometimes we go down there, and it's a neighborhood place. So we go there after Labor Council meetings sometimes. Nice people, great servers in both places, So those are two restaurants, both of them I really like in Lynn. And I go there pretty often, so.
Oh, that sounds delicious. I've been to April's. I've never been to Brickyard?
Brickyard, yeah.
I'm going to have to try that out.
Steak tips, they have good stuff and long history. It's an interesting place,
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. Guys, make sure that you guys go support our local restaurants here in Lynn. A lot of families supporting these restaurants and a lot of family-ran restaurants that are just dying to be able to serve you guys some amazing and great food. And when we come back, we're going to talk about this amazing Apple TV series that we were able and had the privilege of being able to see the first 2 episodes, but also an amazing book that was received very well, and there's a lot of context that has been implemented into the series. So we'll be right back. So guys, we're going to talk about an amazing Apple TV series that we've been watching. It's really, really good, and it inspired me. We actually had a really, really awesome conversation about D-Day, right? Normandy, and a lot of that. But Jeff, why don't you tell us a little bit about the show? What's it called, and where can people find it, and so forth?
So it's called Masters of the Air, and it's on Apple TV Plus. And if people may remember, Band of Brothers, Spielberg and Hanks have done a series, 2 different previous series. One about the World War II invasion of Europe, and they followed one group of soldiers, Easy Company, all the way through. they did another one called The Pacific about the Marines going island to island in the Pacific. And what they were trying to do is just tell the story of what it was like for those soldiers. They're not doing so much on the big backdrop of the war. So this time they decided to do the air war, and they picked my father's unit, the 100th Bomb Group. So he was, for 2 years, from 1941, he signed up. In 1943, he deployed to England, East Anglia, and flew bombers for 2 years. He was a navigator over Germany and over other military targets in Europe, Trondheim and other places. So they picked his unit, and so he ended up being a major character, one of 4 or 5 major characters. So he's in this show called Masters of the Air, which is currently showing. It's a 9-part series. They've shown 8 already. So tomorrow night, actually you can get it early. You can get it Thursday night, I figured out. But Friday night is when officially you can get the last, and then series will be over. So they have an actor playing my dad, and he wrote a book himself called Wing and a Prayer. And he was an English teacher. So his father had a 7th grade education, but he went to University of Iowa. That was back when you could literally work your way through college. It sounds like another world now. So he just washed dishes in the student union and paid for his whole college education. So he was an English teacher and a writer, so he left a lot of records, and he also kept everything. So they used that, and he became the lead navigator. He was one of only 4 flight officers who survived from out of, I think, 250, 300 who went over in 1943, and either mostly were shot down or killed, and then a few of them made it through, a handful made it through 25 missions and got to go home. So he was one of the only officers who was there the whole time. He became lead navigator. So he's a big part of that story. And it's actually an actor. It's pretty surreal watching someone play your dad, Harry Crosby, on television.
Yeah.
So kind of crazy,
And played by an amazing Irishman, yeah?
Yeah, he's great. Yeah. Anthony Boyle was his name. We had a chance to meet him a couple of times. It was really nuts. They actually they had a grand opening in L.A., so they sent a Cadillac Escadrille, I think it's called, to my house at 4 in the morning, and picked me up, drove me to the airport, paid for our plane to go stay there for 2 days to see the opening. And the driver was a cool guy. I don't know if he'll see this. He was a Dominican guy from the Point. I enjoyed talking with him in Salem.
Nice.
But that's the only time I ever rode in a Cadillac Escadrille like that. It's a giant SUV in front of
the
the
Escalade,
house.
I remember
Escalade,
that.
yeah. It was a hoot. So
Nice.
it's kind of a crazy experience, but it's been. I think they did it respectfully. I think they made a lot of effort to get it right. My sister helped them for years with my mom's letters and mission reports and stuff. She's kind of the family archivist, my younger sister Becky, so she helped a lot. It's a pretty strange experience, but I think they're doing a good job, and my hope is that people see the sacrifices that they make and that they made, including giving their lives, and that makes people think about the fight against fascism and why it matters and why we need to be alert today also, as we see that kind of thing kind of raise up again in different parts of the world, including here. And you see anti-Semitism come back, and you see racism come back, and you see that.
Absolutely.
So you want, I hope that it leaves people with that kind of thinking, as well as it's a fascinating story, and it is a story genuinely of heroes who risked their lives, and many gave their lives, so that we could not fall under fascism in the entire world.
Well, let's talk about Mr. Harry Crosby for a little bit. I did watch the show, and obviously as a visually impaired person, I don't see a lot of the body language, but I do see through audio, right, a lot of the kind of like the flexions, the way they speak and so forth, and even some of the slang they used at the time. But from your personal experience being the son of Mr. Crosby there, what was something that during one of the episodes that really stood out to you that you were like, yeah, that's so something my dad would do? Like, just got the emotion right, the body language right, the language right, like just super on point, that it really brought you back to your youth.
Well, the thing that Anthony Boyle, and we met him in L.A., he said, I'm afraid to come to Boston. And we said, why? He says, you're going to run me out of town on a rail. And we said, why? And he said, because all your father does in the first episode is throw up and get lost. He says, but really, by the end, he's a hero. Hang in there. By the time
Yeah.
you get to episode 9, he's a hero. And, that was true. And we knew that about my dad. He got sick every time he flew. And that's why he could never be a pilot. So that was, sort of, it's played somewhat for humor. But, he had to, even though he got constantly airsick, he had to keep going. And it's also true that when he first flew to England, he couldn't find England. And, here he is. He got out of the plane in the show, and he goes, I'm the worst navigator in the 8th Air Force. They looked down, and it's the coast of France. He missed the entire island,
Wow.
So they, he had to break radio silence and get called back.
Do you recall how old he was at the time?
He was 23, I think, when he deployed.
Oh, my goodness.
Maybe 24. He turned 24, I think, in England. So, and because of the casualties,
Incredible.
he was promoted very quickly. And so he ended up being lead navigator. And if his group was leading, sometimes he was putting together 2,000 planes in the air, over England before they headed out to Germany. The one thing that I did notice, it's more clear even in his book, but even in the show, he talks about the ground crew, the mechanics. In the book, he talks about when he became a captain, he had a Jeep for the first time, and so he could go around all over the whole base. The base was huge, and he looked at the people where they put the parachutes together, and he looked where the mechanics stayed, and he looked at the groundskeepers and the people that built the buildings and all of that. And he always had a respect for work. And if his grandfather was like that also, and if you were a worker, that was high praise. Wow. And so that I noticed of him. I think they got that right. He cared. He felt the pilots maybe got the glory if they lived, but he always felt there's those ground guys that kept us in the air. The doctors who saved our lives when we got back, who kept the planes flying when they could have gone down. So he had a deep, deep respect for the ground crew, all those people. He never held himself above anybody, and he always cared about My mom was the same. She had a saying over her desk that we noticed again after she passed away in 1980. And it was a quote from Helen Keller, who was a socialist, and it said, the world is moved forward not only by the great and the mighty, but by every honest worker. And I think those were values that they had, and those are values that, that I took from them, not really explicitly, but just, absorbed from their lives. So my dad was like that. He respected everybody and everybody's work. His father worked on a railroad building bridges, and so he appreciated that kind of work and what the contributions were. So that was one thing that caught me. So,
Well, oftentimes the workers, right, they're seen as the bottom of the ship. They might be underwater. They might be the people least seen and least acknowledged. But it's because of them that these foundation blocks are set in stone so that the whole thing can keep afloat and keep moving forward. I think without these workers, right, a lot of these laborers that we had at the time, and even today, it's because of us as blue-collar workers that we're able to move the country forward and keep it afloat and keep the cell kind of, get it to its destination.
And also, I think the level of skill is not always respected. You do something many, many, many times, and you kind of get the hang of it. It seems easy, but the skills that go into it, and not just blue-collar workers, the teachers, the nurses, all those folks. And so that was something that I definitely. And they had a great scene in one of the shows, maybe episode 3, where one of the mechanics they're trying to get it going, and Rosie, who is this, I think it was Rosie. No, it was one of the other pilots. He wanted to fly, and there was something wrong, and the mechanic actually rode the plane on the runway, fixing it at the last second, and then dropped off as they took off.
Wow.
And it turns out there's a lot amongst the children of the 100th Bomb Group veterans, there's a lot of discussion about that. And it turned out that actually happened. That guy's children spoke up and said, oh yeah, that really happened. So they did incredible stuff, and these planes would come back all shot to pieces, and they'd have to put them together again so they could go back in the air and keep the pilots, and each crew had 10 people. So if a plane went down, that was 10 folks. It wasn't like now. So they had to keep the people safe and also allow them to carry out their mission. So.
With Mr. Crosby, what was the thing that he would most talk about? Like if you were ever around, and he would talk about being in war or being and his service and so forth. What was the story he would typically mention?
I think a lot of what he believed in a lot of soldiers. Every soldier I've ever talked to, I have not been in the service. They talk about the people they served with, and that's with my father, especially, there was a Jewish pilot who meant a lot to him named Rosenthal, and he used to always say, brilliant guy, became an attorney, was an attorney before the war, signed up, became a pilot, flew 52 missions. He only had to fly 25. Whoa. He stayed. And then after the war, he went and was a prosecutor at Nuremberg where the Nazis were put on trial. Yeah. So that guy was really important to him. And I think that's the kind of, he would talk about the people he was with. And that's my experience with veterans and soldiers. It's the people they fought with, they became really close to. And at the end of my dad's book, he says that, I think about the good times, all the people I lost and soldiers who died, but also the camaraderie. And I also think that my dad believed in the mission, he believed, and I think it informed him for the later parts of his life that something that happened in the camps, in the death camps, that can never be allowed to happen again. And, hating immigrants, or hating, racial segregation, some of that I wish now I could ask him more about, especially, but that's one thing I always tell everybody is talk to the elders, ask them anything you might think about because they're not going to be there forever. So there are questions I would love to go back and ask my dad about. But
what would be one of them?
I'd like to know how much did his war experience inform his thinking in the rest of his life? Was that why he was an advocate for affordable housing? Was that why in our neighborhood, when new Jewish families moved in, he was always invite them over, and some people wouldn't do that. And was that why? Is that where that came from? Or was it his faith? I mean, my folks were both church-going people, so maybe that was part of it. So those are the kinds of things I'd like to ask him more about, what shaped him. And but I can't ask him anymore. And we fought a lot as kids. And when I was a kid, I mean, it was the '60s. I was much more left-wing, more socialist-minded, and he was more mainstream. And he was tough. I'd subscribe to a magazine. He would subscribe to it, and he'd read it, and he'd go after me. With the footnotes, and no, this isn't right. He was tough. But we reconciled, and a lot. And so the last 25 years, we were as close as we could be, depending where I was living at the time. So those are some things I'd like to ask him about. I'd like to ask him about how he raised me. What does he think looking back? What I'm a parent now myself. Yeah. I'd be curious, and what he thinks he did right or wrong. And parents just do the best they can. I don't know if there is a right or wrong, but I'd be curious. He raised us very strict. Everybody had chores. We always talk about he would bounce a quarter on the bed, because that's what they did, I guess, when they inspected your room and your bed in the military. And if it didn't bounce, then you didn't make it tight enough, and all that kind of stuff. Wow. He was tough. You eat what's put in front of you. You never complain about food. You just eat it, and you're not allowed to dislike any foods. Except for maybe 2. And of those 2, you had to have 2 bites, so you would learn to like them.
Wow, I love that. Okay.
I don't know.
We got to start doing that a little more often around here.
Yeah. So, but he also let me do crazy stuff. When I was 17, he let me hitchhike across the country by myself.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
So,
okay.
I mean, that's he. And this was my mom. This wasn't just him, but together, I would love to ask them more about their parenting and what they think looking back, and what they did right, what they might change. And because I know I caused them. I always say sometimes, a child's mission is to break their parents' heart. That's going to happen. I know I made tough times for them sometimes, and I'd love to talk about that now, but now they're gone, so I can't do that.
What was your kind of the most, I believe the right word would be fondest memory, the closest memory you have to the present, maybe one of the memories that you hold dearest before he passed of your father?
It's funny, I would say, at the very beginning, when I was a child, a small child, I remember him lying on his back and putting me up on his knees and throwing me up in the air. And, and I was maybe 4 or 5 at the time, maybe younger. The other part of it is when he was older and he really didn't get out and didn't do very much, how much he enjoyed, just sat in a chair all day, in his final years. But how much he enjoyed having family around, and how much he would look at the pictures of his family on the wall and how much that meant to him. And I remember in between one time when we were arguing about the war in Vietnam or something, and he said to me, we were really arguing, and I was probably getting my butt kicked. He was pretty smart. I was hanging in there, but he said to me, I have to say, I try to remember that I might be wrong and you might be the wave of the future. And I know he said that through gritted teeth because he didn't think that for a minute. But he was trying to be open-minded and trying to listen and treat me respectfully, even though I was just a kid. So those are all things that I remember about him and that I respect.
You did say something right now. I don't want to get too off topic from the series, but you did say something that really sparked here that I think if I didn't ask, the viewers would be like, why didn't you say something? You hitchhiked at 17 across the country?
Yeah.
How was that?
It's great. I mean, I always, even today, I think of, my father was this way too. I think that any interaction is kind of a chance for social investigation, you know, and so I put on packed a knapsack, I put a sleeping bag up on top, I walked out of my house in Newton Corner, went down to the turnpike, put my thumb out, and went to California. You know, the year before I went to New Mexico, same way. And most of the time I was by myself. You know, sometimes if somebody would meet me somewhere and we go together. And I met all kinds of people. You know, a lot of people pick you up because they want to talk. Sometimes they're lonely. So traveling preachers or career Army folks who are moving from one assignment to another. Occasionally women, very rarely, because they're more hesitant to pick up a kid. And it was hitchhiking was more common then, I think, in the 60s and 70s. But I learned a ton. I remember one time I was in Nebraska and I was traveling between Omaha and Lincoln, I think. And a guy picked me up. I don't know who he was. We got to talking about the civil rights movement. It was 1968, I think, at that year. So stuff was happening all over the place. And Dr. King had been killed. So he told me about a lynching that he had witnessed. I think it was in Omaha. And I actually later read about it at the same one. Came across it in a book many years later, and I realized that's exactly the one he was telling me about. So, that stayed with me, like this was somebody who had actually been there and seen that. And it's not, people think of Jim Crow as like separate water fountains. It wasn't just that, it was murder, it was like, if you try to vote, you can be killed, so you look at somebody wrong, you could be killed, if someone claims that you said something to a white woman, you could be killed. I mean, so there was violence always enforced that. And I remember just sitting in this guy's car going, oh my God, this is really, this is a horrible thing, and this has happened in my country not so long ago.
I remember when I was in elementary school, I went to Martin Luther King Jr. Elementary School in Compton, California. And every year around like Martin Luther King Day, they would show like the documentary where it's like half animated and half like historical kind of footage. And I was so in awe of seeing like, the segregated bathrooms, the segregated restaurants, how you were kind of mentioning it earlier, where they would hose down black folks and men and women right on the sidewalks, and there was these huge pressure kind of hoses just on them. And one of the things that really hurt was seeing how Dr. King, they would like throw things at his house, set it on fire, and all these crazy things that would happen. And as a child, I remember looking at this, and I don't know if it was the fact that I'm an immigrant. I don't know if it was the fact that I was growing up in poverty. But something inside of me strongly connected with King in that moment, that for the rest of my life, not only do I, even as a visually impaired person now, not only do I still remember those images vividly, but I even used it in my graduation speech in 2018 at North Shore Community College, where it was Dreams Have No Limits. And I started by saying, Martin Luther King many years ago said, I have a dream. Well, today I tell you that I too have a dream. What would be one of your dreams in Lynn?
I guess I would go back to what I said initially about some of the biggest problems. I would love to see a massive affordable housing plan. And it's very challenging because the federal funding isn't there that used to be there when they did the work in what I think was called Veterans Village, I think, years ago. A lot of that's not available, so it's very challenging. But that's what I would like to see. And I just had talking to a friend this morning who said her son, who's black, was walking down the street and got stopped, for no particular reason. And nothing he was doing apparently provoked that. And this was after the shooting, so everyone's freaking out and they're trying to find who did this. And that scared her, because what if he didn't, nothing happened.
Like racial profiling, right?
Yeah, and what if he had got angry? What if he had given the officer some lip, and the officer had a bad day, or he was just on edge because they're trying to, people are complaining to the police, you're not stopping this. So I understand they're in tremendous pressure. So those kind of things is to gradually continue to rebuild trust. I think the unarmed response team is important. Will help some with that. And then I would love to see more unions. I'd love to see GE get more work. I'd love to, those are still my friends.
Yeah.
I would like to see more investment in places like Lynn. We got skilled people, and I would love to see that happen. So there's all kinds of things, but I'm also trying to step back a little bit. I don't need that. Trying to read a little more, write a little more. I don't know if you've ever seen that T-shirt, so many books in so little time, or if you've heard about that T-shirt, But that's kind of how I feel. I got stacks.
It's a very bookworm thing.
Yeah, I got stacks and stacks of books at home that I want to read, and I don't know when I'll ever get to them, because I'm not going to live forever. Got to read those books, so.
Well, even as a writer, sometimes it's the same, but instead of so many books, so little time. As a reader, it's also as a writer. I want to write so much, and I have all these ideas, but it's like within full-time work and interpreting and all of the things that I do, you got to kind of squeeze it all in, right?
And intellectual work is hard work.
Oh, yeah.
When I realized my dad wrote this whole book, it's like, I think it's generally underappreciated. The level of discipline it requires day after day. But you're young. You have a lot of years ahead of you. You can write a lot of books. My time's running out.
Well, it's but why don't you tell us a little bit? Where can folks find Masters of the Air, and where can they find prayer, A Wing and a Prayer?
Yeah, A Wing and a Prayer is my dad's memoir. I think it was printed in 1993, and you can get it just by go to. I usually go to a store called Odyssey Bookstore online. It's it's a small bookstore, independent, and it's out in Western Mass, and they'll find it for you. But you can get it on Amazon, anywhere else. It's starting to sell again, even though it kind of had died out. The other book is called Masters of the Air itself. That's more history. It's not an individual memoir. I found that really interesting too. There's a lot of stuff in there that's not in the show. The show is more about just the individual group of soldiers.
Yeah.
So that you can do that. The show itself is on Apple TV Plus, and you can get it there. And if you get it, I think if you sign up for it now, you can probably watch all 9 of them. You can binge on it. So.
Yeah.
Probably shouldn't say this, but if you wait long enough, maybe you'll get a free week and you can watch the whole thing. But other than that, you sign up for Apple TV. And that's how you find it. So.
Nice. All right. Thank you, Jeff. And right now we're going to come back and we're just going to have a conversation about what are you currently involved in, and maybe some of the things that are coming up. So we'll be right back. Okay. So I'm getting hungry, Jeff. Maybe after this, I'll have to go check out Brickyard.
Yeah, Brickyard or April's. Yeah.
Either that or tonight, because I'm taking my future son to get some hibachi. But tell us a little bit real quick, what are you being involved in right now?
Well, like I said, I'm 73, so I'm trying to step back. I'm still involved with the Lynn Coalition. Lynn Coalition, I'm no longer executive director. I'm done with that. A guy named Tanveer Malik is now the executive director. Tish Mukala is the president. So, but people like myself and Maria Carrasco, we're still around and still helping. Yeah, that's a coalition of, I think, 13 organizations that's involved in affordable housing and other issues, education, supporting education, better schools, things like that. So I'm still doing that. I still go to Labor Council meetings, and I go every month. And I still am a representative of my union as a retiree, Local 201 at General Electric.
Nice.
But I'm not the head, the president of anything. I'm not the executive director of anything, and I'm really liking that. I've been there, done that. Like 20, 30 years. So now I always tell people I'm just going to lay around and think deep thoughts. I don't have to want to do all that and don't want to lead anything anymore. So. But I'm also trying to do a lot of reading and some writing, and also trying to figure out, what's, for example, in this election, as someone who's more of a socialist, like how do we pull together to defeat the extreme right when people are righteously frustrated and angry, in my opinion, with President Biden over things like Gaza, which is a war crime in my view.
Yeah.
So, how do you navigate that? So those are the kind of things I'm thinking about right now, and continue to work on, and still trying to spend time with my family, keep the house up, trying to be a good husband, and do those things as well. So.
Well, I wish you the best with getting more time to read, right? But also in all the movements and all the thinking that you've been doing and are continually going to, I hope, keep providing wisdom for labor councils and so forth, Lynn Coalition, because we really need that wisdom, as you were mentioning earlier, right? Like right now is the time to ask these questions, because you're a pot of wisdom that we can gather a lot from and receive a lot of counsel from, and we still have that. And so I really appreciate a lot of the wisdom that you've shared with many folks around not just Lynn, but I think even in surrounding communities and organizations. And before we get going, I just want to ask you: is there anybody today that you would like to honor? And if so, if you could just posture yourself to the camera and let them know what are your words for them.
First of all, on the advice and stuff, I would say I always say my advice is free and it's worth every penny. So I'm free to hand it out. So
and you're free to refund.
Yeah, right. No refund because it's free. So no refund. But that's a role I'm happy to try to play as best I can.
Okay.
I think when I think of the union, and I punched in February of 1979 on second shift as a grinder, there were two people there who kind of guided me as a young kid who was trying to get involved. First of all, just trying to learn my job so I could do it right. And I didn't, that's the first thing. You have to learn the machine. But as I got involved later in the union, Charlie Ryder was a mentor to me. He's passed away way too young. I think he was 56.
Wow.
He's been gone a long time now. But he became the business agent. He was a Vietnam vet. Very, very principled, brilliant leader. High school education, didn't have a lot of formal education. And just an extraordinary guy who somehow knew how to fight for your principles, and still try to unify people. Not the union, like any organization, you have these kind of blood feuds that can go on forever, and he tried to help us bury that, but still fight to maintain our employment and our jobs and our goodwill. So he was just a brilliant, brilliant guy and somebody I respect. Ronnie Malloy, who is still with us, he retired. He became an attorney after he was business agent. They were both business agents. Ronnie was also vice president before that. He was another one who just very principled guy. When there was all kinds of fighting in the union, he would try to be fair, always try to be fair, always, and listen to the younger stewards like myself, and give us an opportunity. Also, sometimes both of them protect us from doing something stupid that we were going to do that would have got us in a lot of trouble and pissed everybody off. So they both kind of calmed us down sometimes, but those are the people that I think set me on my way and really helped me get going in my union career. And that's most of what I've done most of my life, is be active in the union.
Well, thank you, Jeff. Is there anybody is there anywhere people can contact you?
Well, you contact me at home. I don't go to an office anymore, but you can also look up the New Lynn Coalition, and you can get that and call them and talk to Tish McCullough or Tanvir.
We'll put that contact information down below. Guys, thank you so much for being with us. Jeff, thank you. We wish you the best in everything that you do. Thank you so much for being here with us. And guys, I just want to let you guys know our next guest is going to be somebody pretty amazing. I won't spoil it, but you don't want to miss out. But make sure you like, subscribe, and we'll leave contact information down below. Make sure you check out A Wing and a Prayer and Masters of the Air on Apple TV+. Thank you guys so much for being with us. And remember to walk by faith and not by sight. We'll see you guys next time.
You're an inspiration, Dany. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.